Hi there, and welcome to Ask Josh. Today we have a question sent in from Fran, and her question is, what can I do to manage reactive hypoglycemia? Well, I'm glad you asked that question because there's lots you can do. Firstly, let's define what hypoglycemia is. Hypoglycemia is hypo, low, glycemia, meaning blood sugar. So it's low blood sugar. Now, reactive hypoglycemia is a reaction to an excess release of insulin or a large release of insulin. How does that happen? Let's start to look upstream. Well, if we consume a meal that contains a high amount of carbohydrates, easily digestible carbohydrates, could be in the form of grains, added sugars, even a big batch of legumes, we digest that, our pancreas senses this influx of carbohydrate. It releases a large amount of insulin to try to deal with that in a timely manner, but it can have a hyper response. It can release too much insulin in response to all those carbohydrates coming into the bloodstream. As a result, it overcompensates, and the individual may experience low blood sugar as a result sometime after consuming that food. Then they get feelings of, low blood sugar. They may get dizzy, headaches, hangry, not able to concentrate that well, symptoms of poor attention, and the list can go on depending on the individual experiencing the hypoglycemia. The most important thing is to prevent this in the first place and make sure we're consuming low glycemic index, low glycemic load meals. What's the difference between those two? Well, the glycemic index is the speed at which a food will be absorbed into the bloodstream. For example, if we consumed a piece of white bread, that will go into the bloodstream extremely quickly and ramp up blood sugar. That has a glycemic index of about 100. If we consume the exact same amount of calories or carbohydrates in the form of an apple, per se, that's going to get into bloodstream at a much slower rate. So it talks about glycemic index, how quickly that ends up in the bloodstream. Glycemic load's a bit different. It looks at the quantity. So just as the name suggests, load, it looks at how much you're consuming. So even if you have something that's really high glycemic index, like let's use a ridiculous example, like a jelly bean. If you have one single jelly bean, that's not going to influence the blood sugar too badly. But if you have a whole handful of jelly beans, same food, same glycemic index, it's going to ramp up blood sugar and your body is not going to know what to do with all of that. There's going to be a huge insulin release and your body's going to attempt to get some of it into the cells to be burned as energy. The rest it's going to store as fat. So that's what we have to think about when we eat the meal. Glycemic index and glycemic load for whatever we're consuming. And there's a number of tips and tricks you can use to actually help decrease the glycemic index of the meal. One of them is to make sure you include fiber. So you can even sprinkle some ground flaxseed on your food or just make sure that it's a high fiber meal with lots of vegetables. You can even consume vinegar, like apple cider vinegar. If you have about a tablespoon or two of apple cider vinegar with a meal, it can blunt the glycemic effect of that meal. So that's really important for preventing reactive hypoglycemia. If we've been doing this for a long time though, we might have gotten into a state of poor insulin sensitivity and we might have to work our way out of that slowly but surely. One strategy that some individuals need to use is consuming food on a regular basis. So if you find that you're having reactive hypoglycemia a lot and you're having these blood sugar crashes, you might need to make sure that you're having a regular dose of calories and then slowly lengthen the time between meals to get your insulin sensitivity back on board. There's also some key nutrients we need to think about when it comes to blood sugar managing. One of them is chromium. Chromium is part of the glucose tolerance factor, which helps get glucose into all of our cells. If we're chromium deficient, we're not going to have as good of an insulin response. Vanadium, which has got some insulin mimicking activity, And the B vitamins, really important to fuel the Krebs cycle and cellular respiration, and to make sure you're actually burning fuel appropriately and moving it through our energy production systems. So those would be a few really good places to start if you're trying to address reactive hypoglycemia.